All right, welcome back, everybody. So this is the 1st of July, and we are looking at the trains that are set to resume service from this morning. But as you know, it's definitely nowhere near full capacity that they'll be running at. So 15% is what the ministry has said. The Transport Minister saying that trains will run at 15%. We've got our reporters that will be stationed at different stations around the country, and we'll find out what it's looking like this morning with regard to commuters starting to use the train services once again. So that's one of the issues we'll be looking at. We'll also be looking at the figures that were released yesterday, and this is not painting a very good picture of the of our economy, never mind the global economy, and we'll be dissecting those numbers with Davi Ritt on the program. But I know that Sakina is going to talk to the train story, and I think her next guest is PRASA. So Sakina, let me hand this over to you. Oh, okay. All right. We're not ready with our guest as yet, unfortunately. So I was not hearing whether or not we were going to be going. But the question I think that we're looking at this morning to try and understand how close COVID-19 is to you. Are you feeling it? Is it something that has suddenly become a reality in your life? You know, we were always looking at the stories from afar, talking about Italy, talking about the US, talking about the figures that were going in from China, and, you know, looking at the visuals. But now that the numbers are coming in fast and furiously in South Africa, how real is it becoming in your life? Is it something that now all of a sudden you almost are becoming a bit scared of? Sakina, I don't know if you're there that I can talk to you about this, but
I'm here.
It's here. There we go. Thank you. I felt like I was talking to myself for a while. But it has become an absolute reality. I don't know if you're feeling it. As soon as you sort of wake up in the morning, you're like, oh, here we go.
Absolutely, Leanne. And of course, it's cold, it is winter, and obviously people are going to develop, symptoms of colds, flus, and not everything is COVID, because right now, the minute you sneeze, the minute you cough, people look at you funny because is that COVID? And I don't know how we're going to play this one, because the symptoms are the same. They, it presents with some of the same symptoms. So, yeah. But of course, they give you a list, and a doctor will tell you, no, too few symptoms. You're still good. Go and treat whatever it is that you have at the moment.
Yeah, it's also the one big problem as well is the stigma that's associated with it. And, as much as it is a horrific thing to get, I mean, there is such a desperate stigma associated with getting COVID-19, and it's unnecessary. It actually is an unnecessary thing. Obviously, if you have got it, you isolate, you go away from people in terms of not trying to infect others. But I've just heard some terrible stories of how people have literally been kicked out of communities because they've been infected, and that doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't. Just people, you do recover. You can recover from this, but you just need to take the precautions. So, it's become one of those things that there are so many facets and aspects to coronavirus. So we just, we can't talk enough about it, unfortunately.
No, certainly we can't. And, just looking at some of the other stories that we are trying to bring up to speed on, I should say, is of course the train situation. And those will resume operation this morning. The services, however, will be extremely limited. The Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa, or PRASA, says that trains will not be able to service customers who usually use taxis and buses to commute. And yesterday, Transport Minister Fikile Mbalula visited some facilities to inspect social distancing measures, sanitization, and of course the use of personal protective equipment by officials. So to help us understand this picture a little better, we are joined now by Nosipho Damasane, who's the Chief Executive Officer of PRASA. So she joins us right now. Thanks so much for your time and welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you very much and good morning.
Mr. Damasane, first and foremost, we know and we've seen during this lockdown period how some of the infrastructure, the rail infrastructure in particular, has been vandalized. So can you just give us a sense of what the minister's visit yesterday showed in terms of vandalism and your infrastructure in general?
I think in general, vandalism has been the biggest challenge in terms of getting the PRASA operations up and running. So effectively, what we are going through is that as late as last night, we actually had more vandalism happening. So effectively, we're actually just going through a process of either sabotage combined with people who are just plain thieving, but we are just going through that pain at this point in time. And what we have done is to deploy more security in the areas where we are about to operate. So as we indicated yesterday, we're not actually opening all the lines. We're opening a few corridors. And in those corridors that we are opening, we are focusing in Gauteng, we have one corridor only that we've opened. And then in the other areas like Eastern Cape, we're opening 2 lines, which is East London and Port Elizabeth. And then in Cape Town, we're opening 1 line to Retrieve. So we actually have chosen a couple of lines to start, to also sample how this process is going to go, having to take into account the COVID-19 regulations, social distancing, washing of your hands, wearing of masks, and combining that with the reality of the number of people that we're moving. So we've budgeted our people at 15% capacity. And that's basically what we will be doing at this point in time. So we're not anticipating a lot of people. And we're also not anticipating that we'll have a lot of rush. But we are running on delay this morning already by 40 minutes, just because of the vandalism that happened after 12 a.m. last night.
So you do say, Ms. Damasane, that you've deployed additional security for those lines that will be operational. But if one looks at the type of destruction that has been visited on the commuter rail infrastructure, one has to ask, why wasn't it secured? Where was security? Because in some instances, you have the entire track basically stolen. And this has been going on for some time, but it seems like it may have gotten worse. Is that your assessment? And how do you respond to the fact that as PRASA, you've been unable to actually police and make sure that you keep secure your infrastructure?
I think if you follow properly in terms of what has been happening at PRASA is in the past, there were those security contracts that were terminated in October, followed by April, because of all the other reasons in terms of how the procurement processes had gone. So that opened the first gap in terms of security. There were problems even when we had those security companies, but now they've been surmounted by the fact that we're actually operating with less than what we're supposed to be having. And I think there's also, just looking at this thing from outside, you can see there's also a deliberate effort to make sure that the vandalism continues. And then there's an element of theft that's actually going with it as well on the side.
When you say there's a deliberate effort to ensure that the vandalism continues, what do you mean by that? And who do you suspect of being behind this?
No, well, at this point in time, I don't have any suspicion. I'm just saying that immediately we announced that we were going to start operating, the vandalism actually increased.
So let's just take a look at the social distancing inside those coaches as we deal with COVID-19. What sort of measures have you put in place?
What we have done is we're actually saying that nobody will be allowed into the station without wearing a mask. That is the first thing. So we're enforcing wearing of masks for people who will ride the trains. The second one is we sanitize you when you come into our stations and when we leave the stations. And the third one is we've put in all the stickers for social distancing on the station as well as inside of the train. And the fourth important aspect is that we disinfect the trains in motion. So as soon as they turn in all the places where people get off and get on, we actually then sanitize, disinfect the trains themselves, and we continue to sanitize people inside of the trains.
So with regard to policing that, once again, how will you do that?
Come again?
How will you actually be ensuring that people adhere to these rules that you've put in place?
We have actually appointed marshals formally who are actually wearing a uniform of PRASA, who actually are helping us. So in each coach, we'll have 2 marshals. In all the platforms, we're actually having marshals that are deployed, and in the stations, who are also giving direction to people in terms of how to operate in this new normal.
So given the damage that you have experienced to your rail infrastructure, how long will it take for other lines to actually come into operation?
What we have agreed to do in the month of July include KwaZulu-Natal at some point next week, and then we'll actually just begin to deploy. So we will actually release the plan as we go in terms of the lessons we learned from the 4 corridors we open now and how we are planning to roll it out to open up the rest of the system. And taking into account the fact that we're still on the lockdown, on the regulations period for COVID.
So how has this lockdown affected your financial aspect of the business?
We haven't, obviously we have lost a lot of money because we have not been operating since the end of March. So today is the first attempt, and we can't even say that at 50% of our operating model, we will actually recover any costs, but we have to start somewhere to actually then begin to build the confidence back into the system.
So have you been able to quantify that in terms of how much exactly you've actually lost as a result of the lockdown?
We actually know that we will end up with a loss of 770 million this financial year.
770 million rand. So it places your finances then firmly under the spotlight, because we know that even as we see at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry that resumed this week, the focus has been on PRASA. And with this loss that is incurred as a result of COVID-19, with some of your historical debt as well, what's the financial picture looking like at PRASA rather at the moment? And what is your liquidity ratio right now?
Well, I can't get into the details of liquidities and everything else. I'm also just a month, 2 weeks into the job. But the reality of it is that we know that we're actually suffering tremendously financially at this point in time. So we have made recommendations to the Department of Transport, which have gone to National Treasury to look into our situation financially.
So with regard to actually servicing the infrastructure that has been vandalized, the cables that have been stolen, is PRASA in a position right now to replace that, or are you going to have to wait for financial assistance?
No, we actually are able to do so because our capital budget is actually not affected negatively. So as we speak, we have people on the ground putting signaling work, and we actually have capital projects rolling.
So the lines, are you able to tell us which lines exactly are affected, for example, yes, in Gauteng, and how long it will take for those to come back into operation?
No, I'm not in a position to do so, but I can say that we do have a clear strategy in terms of how we're going to open these corridors, corridor by corridor, starting with the 4 that we are doing today.
And just this idea that trains will not be able to service customers who usually use taxis and buses, Ms. Damasane.
No, trains will be, no. I think we need to probably try not to confuse the issues. The one issue is that we're actually dealing with the COVID-19 regulations, which actually by nature forces us to stagger the way we open the lines. So to actually fix as we go. So we're not necessarily just inconveniencing people, but we are actually sampling this, starting with the 4 corridors that we're opening today.
The question I was going to ask was about limiting numbers. So with regard to that, can you just give us some clarity? How many passengers will a coach normally be able to take, and how many will you be limiting it to?
We're actually taking more than half of the people on the train. In each coach, we'll have about 54 people. We've allowed for people to also stand. We've taken the second seat of every coach. So effectively, we've worked around those numbers. I'm actually, as I'm speaking to you now, heading to run to the stations because we're starting the service today, and some of the things that we have to deal with are on the ground as we speak. And so I'm going to have to try to wrap up with you.
Minister Mbalula yesterday paid that visit to some of the facilities in and around Gauteng, and he said he was happy with the work being done, but he did admit that more work needed to be done. Anything more from that side that PRASA has been tasked with?
No, not at this point.
And in terms of the concerns that he expressed,
it's to see the operation happening today, and that's what we are focusing on right now.
So the concerns that were expressed by the minister, how many of those are you able to address immediately, and how many will you be addressing in the medium to long term?
I think security is the big issue for PRASA, and once we fix security for PRASA, we'll be able to continue with the rest.
But that's been an ongoing problem for SASA, Ms. Damasane. People have always complained about their own safety on trains, and we spoke about the infrastructure that gets stolen and vandalized. So how are you, as the new CEO, going to deal with this situation? Do you have any plans? Do you have any ideas as you stepped into this position? How are you going to deal with this issue of security, both to the person who commutes by train and also to the infrastructure?
I am actually, at this point in time, at a PRASA level, we have actually appointed the general who's looking after all the security issues. There's clear plans in terms of what we need to do on security. It is going to take a bit of time because reality is that you can't do it overnight, but we are building it in phases. So we're actually starting with physical security. We'll be moving to e-guarding. We'll be moving to more technology, bringing back the drones. But it's a whole plan that will happen over a period to make sure that we secure. And the reality of it is, for PRASA to actually operate properly, the security plan must be rolled out.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for your time this morning, Nosipho Damasane, the CEO of PRASA, for talking to us about the readiness of train service as they resume operation this morning. We also have our reporters out at several train stations, and we'll be bringing you what they are experiencing on the ground. But you heard there from the CEO of PRASA, already 40 minutes late, some of those trains that are running this morning. So seems like business as usual on that front, but hopefully things will improve. Let's get